Our story begins in a world of fading glory and rising empires. Cleopatra, the seventh Philopator, was born in 69 BCE into the heart of Alexandria, a city founded by Alexander the Great. She was a descendant of Ptolemy the First Soter, one of Alexander's generals, who established Greek rule over Egypt. The Ptolemaic dynasty, though Greek in origin, had adopted many Egyptian customs, yet its grip on power was increasingly precarious, reliant on the formidable might of Rome. Egypt was a land of immense wealth, a breadbasket of the Mediterranean, and its strategic importance was not lost on ambitious Roman generals. Cleopatra's early life was steeped in political intrigue and the ever-present shadow of Roman influence. Her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, was a controversial figure. His nickname, the flute player, hinted at his perceived frivolity rather than statesmanship. His reign was marked by instability and heavy taxation to appease Roman creditors. This led to his temporary ousting, a period of exile that deeply impacted young Cleopatra. She witnessed firsthand the fragility of power and the decisive influence of Rome in Egyptian affairs. His eventual restoration, with Roman military backing, underscored this dependence. Cleopatra was no ordinary princess. From a young age, she displayed remarkable intelligence and a keen aptitude for learning. Unlike many of her Ptolemaic predecessors, who often struggled even with Greek, their native tongue, Cleopatra was a gifted linguist. Ancient sources credit her with speaking multiple languages, including Egyptian, a rare feat for a Ptolemaic ruler. This allowed her to connect directly with her diverse subjects, bypassing translators and fostering a deeper understanding of their needs and concerns. Her education was extensive, encompassing rhetoric, philosophy, and mathematics. Upon her father's death in 51 BCE, Cleopatra, then 18, ascended to the throne. According to Ptolemy XII's will, she was to co-rule with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only about 10 years old, as was customary in the Ptolemaic dynasty to maintain pure bloodlines and consolidate power. Cleopatra married her brother. However, this co-regency was fraught with tension from the outset. Ptolemy XIII was heavily influenced by a powerful cabal of courtiers, including his tutor Theodotus, the eunuch Pothinus, and the general Achillas. These advisors saw Cleopatra as a threat to their own power and influence over the young king. They actively worked to undermine her authority, portraying her as too independent and perhaps too ambitious. Cleopatra, for her part, was not content to be a mere figurehead. She asserted her royal prerogatives, even minting coins with her own image, excluding her brothers. This power struggle escalated quickly. The courtiers, fearing her growing strength and popular appeal, especially among the native Egyptian population, decided to act decisively against her. By 48 BCE, the situation had become untenable. Cleopatra was forced out of Alexandria, driven into exile in Syria. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, now reigned as the sole, albeit manipulated, ruler of Egypt. But Cleopatra was not one to accept defeat. She began to gather an army, determined to reclaim her throne. Her resourcefulness and determination were already evident. She understood that her fight was not just against her brother, but against the powerful figures who controlled him. The stage was set for a civil war within Egypt. Little did she know that events far beyond Egypt's borders were about to converge upon her land, bringing with them one of the most powerful men in the world. The Roman Republic itself was embroiled in a devastating civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. This conflict would soon spill onto Egyptian shores, irrevocably shaping Cleopatra's destiny and the future of her kingdom. Her personal struggle for power was about to become entangled with the grand-scale machinations of Rome, offering her both immense peril and unparalleled opportunity. Cleopatra's time in exile was not spent idly. She used her connections and charisma to build support for her cause. She knew that military strength alone might not be enough. She needed powerful allies. The political landscape was shifting rapidly, and she needed to be prepared to seize any advantage. Her focus was singular: to return to Alexandria, depose her brother, and rule Egypt in her own right, free from the manipulation of his advisors. The fate of the Ptolemaic dynasty hung in the balance, and Cleopatra was ready to fight for it with every tool at her disposal. Her understanding of Egyptian culture and language gave her an edge that many previous Ptolemies lacked. She could appeal to nationalist sentiments, presenting herself as a true pharaoh, a protector of Egypt's traditions, in contrast to a court heavily influenced by foreign advisors. This was a crucial element of her strategy, as she sought to build a base of support that extended beyond the Greek elite of Alexandria. The coming confrontation would test her resolve, her intellect, and her ability to navigate the treacherous currents of power politics on both a local and international scale. The young queen, though temporarily displaced, was far from defeated. Her ambition was fueled by a deep love for her country and a belief in her own capacity to rule. She was a product of a complex heritage: a Greek queen in an ancient African land, a woman in a world dominated by men. The challenges before her were immense, but so too was her determination. The next chapter of her life would see her make a dramatic return, forging an alliance that would shake the foundations of the ancient world and forever etch her name into the annals of history. Part 2. Caesar and the Alexandrian. War. The year 48 BCE brought a dramatic turn of events. Julius Caesar, fresh from his victory over Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus, arrived in Alexandria. He was pursuing his defeated rival, who had sought refuge in Egypt. However, Pompey's fate was sealed before Caesar's fleet even docked. The advisors to Ptolemy XIII, in a misguided attempt to curry favor with the victorious Roman general, had Pompey assassinated as he came ashore. They presented Caesar with Pompey's severed head and signet ring. This gruesome offering did not have the intended effect. Caesar was reportedly disgusted by the murder of a Roman consul, even an enemy. He recognized the act for what it was: a betrayal and a sign of the Egyptian court's instability. Caesar established himself in the royal palace in Alexandria, and, asserting his authority as Roman consul, declared his intention to settle the dispute between Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra. He summoned both siblings to appear before him, aiming to enforce the will of their father, Ptolemy XII. Cleopatra, still in exile and facing formidable opposition from her brother's forces controlling Alexandria, knew she had to reach Caesar. A direct approach was impossible. This led to one of the most famous and audacious acts of her life. According to the historian Plutarch, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into the palace. She was concealed within a rolled-up carpet, or possibly a large sack of bed linens, carried by her loyal attendant Apollodorus the Sicilian. This bold maneuver allowed her to bypass her brother's guards. When the carpet was unfurled before Julius, Caesar, the 21-year-old queen emerged. Caesar, then in his early 50s, was reportedly captivated. It wasn't just her legendary charm or beauty, but her intelligence, her courage, and her articulate presentation of her case that impressed him. She spoke to him in Greek, the language of educated Romans and the Ptolemaic court. She argued passionately for her right to rule, exposing the machinations of Pothinus and the other courtiers who manipulated her young brother. Caesar, a shrewd politician and a renowned womanizer, found himself drawn to Cleopatra both personally and politically. He saw in her a potential ally, a ruler who could stabilize Egypt and ensure its continued loyalty and, importantly, its grain supplies to Rome. He decided to support her claim to the throne, insisting that she and Ptolemy XIII rule jointly as their father's will had stipulated. This decision enraged Pothinus and Achilles, who saw their power slipping away. They incited the Alexandrian mob and mobilized the royal army against Caesar's relatively small Roman force. Thus began the Alexandrian War, a bitter conflict fought within the city itself. Caesar, Cleopatra, and her younger sister Arsinoe IV were besieged in the royal quarter. The fighting was fierce and destructive. During the conflict, parts of the famed Great Library of Alexandria were accidentally burned, a tragic loss of ancient knowledge. The war tested Caesar's military genius as he faced superior numbers in an urban environment. Ptolemy XIII, initially under Caesar's control, eventually joined the Egyptian forces opposing the Romans. Cleopatra remained by Caesar's side throughout the siege, her presence likely bolstering his resolve. She was a vital source of local knowledge and political counsel. Her younger sister, Arsinoe, however, escaped the palace and was proclaimed queen by the Alexandrian army, becoming a rallying point for the anti-Roman faction. The war dragged on for several months, with battles fought on land and sea. Roman reinforcements eventually arrived, tipping the scales in Caesar's favor. In a decisive battle near the Nile in early 47 BCE, Ptolemy XIII's forces were defeated. The young king himself drowned in the river while trying to flee, his golden armor weighing him down. With her primary rival dead, Cleopatra's position was secured. Caesar, triumphant, restored her to the throne. To maintain the appearance of Ptolemaic tradition and to provide a male co-ruler, he arranged for Cleopatra to marry her even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, who was about 12 years old. He, however, would be king in name only. Cleopatra was now the undisputed ruler of Egypt, backed by the might of Rome's most powerful general. Their relationship had deepened during the war. Before Caesar departed Egypt in mid-47 BCE, Cleopatra was pregnant with his child. In June of that year, she gave birth to a son, Ptolemy Caesar, popularly known as Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. This child represented a powerful dynastic link between Egypt and Rome, a symbol of their alliance and a potential heir to both legacies, though Roman law did not recognize him as Caesar's legitimate son. With her throne secured and her Roman alliance solidified, Cleopatra began to consolidate her power within Egypt. She undertook a voyage up the Nile with Caesar, a traditional pharaonic procession showcasing her authority and her connection to the Roman conqueror. She focused on restoring stability and prosperity to her kingdom, which had been ravaged by internal strife and the recent war. Her intelligence, ambition, and newfound alliance with Caesar had propelled her from exile to the pinnacle of power in Egypt. But her story was far from over. With Egypt stabilized under her rule, and with her young brother Ptolemy the 14th as a nominal co-regent, Cleopatra turned her attention to the wider political stage. Her relationship with Julius Caesar was not merely a fleeting romance. It was a strategic alliance of immense significance. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra, accompanied by her infant son Caesarion and her brother husband Ptolemy the 14th, traveled to Rome at Caesar's invitation. This was an unprecedented visit for an Egyptian queen, and it caused a considerable stir in the Roman capital. She was housed in Caesar's luxurious villa across the Tiber, a residence outside the city's sacred boundary, the Pomerium, which foreign monarchs were not permitted to cross. Her presence in Rome was both fascinating and controversial. Roman society was captivated by her exotic allure, her intelligence, and her regal bearing. She brought with her a taste of Alexandrian culture, influencing Roman fashion and art. However, many conservative Romans, like Cicero, viewed her with suspicion and disdain. They saw her as a symbol of Eastern decadence and a potential threat to Roman traditions and republican values. Caesar, now dictator for life, openly acknowledged Caesarion as his son, though he could not legally make him his heir under Roman law. He even erected a golden statue of Cleopatra as the goddess Isis in the Temple of Venus Genetrix, an act that shocked many Romans. This public display of affection and honor for a foreign queen fueled rumors about Caesar's monarchical ambitions. Some feared he intended to move the capital of the Roman world to Alexandria or establish a Romano-Egyptian Hellenistic monarchy with Cleopatra as his queen and Caesarion as their heir. Cleopatra's stay in Rome lasted nearly 2 years. During this time, she undoubtedly learned a great deal about Roman politics and culture, further honing her diplomatic skills. She would have observed the complex power dynamics of the Senate and the growing resentment towards Caesar's autocratic rule. She aimed to secure Roman recognition for Caesarion's paternity and, ideally, his succession. She also sought to strengthen Egypt's position as a key ally of Rome, ensuring its continued autonomy and prosperity under her reign. The political climate in Rome, however, was becoming increasingly volatile. Caesar's immense power and his apparent disregard for republican traditions bred conspiracies among a group of senators who feared he would declare himself king. On the Ides of March 15th, 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was assassinated in the Senate House. His death threw the Roman world into chaos and dramatically altered Cleopatra's circumstances. Her primary protector and ally was gone, and her position in Rome became precarious. With Caesar dead, Cleopatra's hopes for Caesarion's future within the Roman power structure were shattered. The assassins, led by Brutus and Cassius, aimed to restore the Republic, while Caesar's supporters, notably Mark Antony and Caesar's adopted son Octavian, sought to avenge his death and seize power. Amidst this turmoil, Cleopatra recognized the danger. Her presence in Rome was no longer tenable. Shortly after Caesar's funeral, she discreetly left the city and returned to Egypt with Caesarion and Ptolemy the 14th. Upon her return to Alexandria, Cleopatra moved swiftly to consolidate her power. Her brother husband, Ptolemy the 14th, died shortly thereafter, possibly from illness, though many historians suspect Cleopatra had him poisoned. He was a teenager with no real power, but his removal eliminated any potential rival claimant to the throne supported by factions hostile to her. Following his death, Cleopatra elevated her 3-year-old son, Caesarion, to the status of co-ruler as Ptolemy V and Caesar. This move further legitimized his position in Egypt and reinforced his connection to Julius Caesar. Egypt, under Cleopatra's sole effective rule, remained a wealthy and strategically important kingdom. As a new round of Roman civil wars erupted between Caesar's assassins and the Second Triumvirate, formed by Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, Cleopatra adopted a cautious policy. She needed to protect Egypt's interests without alienating any of the powerful Roman factions. She initially tried to support the Caesarian cause, but a storm scattered a fleet she sent to aid Antony and Octavian. She managed to maintain Egypt's neutrality, a difficult balancing act. She understood that the future of Egypt was inextricably linked to the outcome of the Roman power struggles. She needed to bide her time, observe the shifting alliances, and be ready to align herself with whoever emerged as the dominant force. Her primary goal remained the preservation of Egypt's independence and the security of her dynasty, embodied by her son Caesarion. The death of Caesar had closed one chapter of her life, but it also opened the door to new possibilities and new alliances, one of which would prove even more consequential and ultimately more tragic. Cleopatra focused on governing Egypt, ensuring its stability and economic strength. She continued to cultivate her image as a pharaoh, a divine ruler in the Egyptian tradition, while also being a sophisticated Hellenistic monarch. She undertook building projects and sought to alleviate famine and social unrest. Her reign was marked by a genuine concern for her people, a quality that distinguished her from many of her predecessors. This period of relative calm allowed her to prepare for the inevitable moment when the Roman storm would once again reach Egypt's shores. Roman world, after Caesar's assassination, was torn apart by another brutal civil war. The Second Triumvirate, consisting of Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and adopted heir, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, eventually defeated Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. Following this victory, the triumvirs divided the Roman territories among themselves. Mark Antony received control of the eastern provinces, which included Egypt's sphere of influence. In 41 BCE, Mark Antony, while in Tarsus in Cilicia, modern-day Turkey, summoned Cleopatra to answer charges that she had aided Cassius. This summons was a test of loyalty and an assertion of Roman authority. Cleopatra, however, saw it as an opportunity. She knew Antony, having met him years earlier when he was a young cavalry officer serving in Egypt. She understood his character: ambitious, flamboyant, a lover of pleasure, but also a capable general and a powerful political figure. She planned her arrival in Tarsus meticulously. Instead of appearing as a supplicant, Cleopatra orchestrated a magnificent entrance designed to awe Antony and the people of Tarsus. She sailed up the river Kidnus on a lavishly decorated barge. The vessel had a gilded stern, purple sails, and silver oars that beat time to the music of flutes, pipes, and lyres. Cleopatra herself reclined under a gold-spangled canopy, dressed as the goddess Venus, Aphrodite to the Greeks, attended by boys dressed as cupids and maidens, as nereids and graces. The air was filled with the scent of exotic perfumes. Her arrival was a masterpiece of political theater. The spectacle was so captivating that Antony, who was waiting to receive her in the marketplace, found himself abandoned as the entire populace rushed to the riverbank to witness the sight. He was compelled to invite her to dinner, but she, with regal confidence, invited him to dine with her aboard her barge instead. Antony, charmed and impressed by her audacity and grandeur, accepted. This marked the beginning of one of history's most legendary love affairs and political alliances. Cleopatra successfully convinced Antony of her loyalty, or at least of the benefits of an alliance with Egypt. She was not merely a beautiful seductress. She was an intelligent and politically astute ruler who offered Antony what he desperately needed: Egypt's vast wealth, resources, and strategic support for his planned military campaigns, particularly against the Parthian Empire, Rome's formidable eastern rival. Antony, in turn, could offer Cleopatra Roman protection for her kingdom and support for her son. Caesarius claims that Antony spent the winter of 41 to 40 BCE in Alexandria with Cleopatra. It was a period of legendary opulence and revelry. They formed a society of inimitable livers, indulging in extravagant banquets, games, and intellectual pursuits. This was not mere hedonism. It was also a way for Cleopatra to bind Antony closer to her and to display the splendor and sophistication of her court. During this time, their personal relationship deepened. Cleopatra became pregnant, and Antony, though he had to return to Rome, was clearly captivated. However, political realities soon intruded. Back in Rome, tensions were rising between Antony and Octavian. To solidify a fragile peace and reaffirm the triumvirate, Antony agreed to a political marriage with Octavian's sister, Octavia. In 40 BCE, Octavia was a virtuous and respected Roman matron, the antithesis of the exotic Egyptian queen. This marriage was a strategic move, but it undoubtedly caused Cleopatra concern. For the next few years, Antony remained in the West, occupied with Roman affairs and his new wife. During Antony's absence, in late 40 BCE, Cleopatra gave birth to twins, Alexander Helios' son, and Cleopatra Selene, moon. She continued to rule Egypt effectively, strengthening her kingdom and patiently waiting for Antony's inevitable need for her resources. She understood the precarious nature of Roman politics and knew that Antony's ambitions in the East would eventually draw him back. She focused on raising her children, including Caesarion, and managing the affairs of her prosperous kingdom. Antony, despite his marriage to Octavia, did not forget Cleopatra or Egypt. His campaigns against Parthia required substantial financial and logistical support, which only Egypt could reliably provide. Octavia accompanied him on some of his eastern ventures, but his thoughts and strategic needs increasingly turned towards Alexandria. The allure of Cleopatra, combined with the practical necessity of Egypt's wealth, proved irresistible. The stage was being set for a reunion that would further entwine their destinies and set them on a collision course with Octavian. Cleopatra's ability to navigate these complex personal and political currents was remarkable. She had secured her throne with Caesar, weathered his assassination, and now forged a powerful new alliance with Mark Antony. She was playing a high-stakes game, balancing her love for Antony, her duty to Egypt, and her ambitions for her children. Her diplomatic skills, her charm, and her strategic acumen were all brought to bear as she sought to maintain Egypt's independence in an increasingly Roman-dominated world. Her relationship with Antony was about to enter a new, more public, and far more dangerous phase that by late 37 BCE, Mark Antony's need for Egyptian resources for his renewed Parthian campaign became paramount. He summoned Cleopatra to Antioch, and their alliance was formally re-established. This reunion marked a definitive shift. Antony effectively set aside his Roman wife, Octavia, who had traveled to Athens to bring him reinforcements and supplies, only to be ordered back to Rome. This public rejection of Octavia was a grave insult to her brother, Octavian, and provided him with powerful propaganda material. Cleopatra joined Antony, bringing with her much-needed funds and supplies. Their personal relationship was also rekindled, and in 36 BCE, she bore him another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. Antony, in turn, acknowledged his paternity of the twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and granted Cleopatra significant territories, including parts of Syria, Cyprus, Crete, and regions of Judea and Arabia. These grants, known as the Donations of Antioch, restored some of the former Ptolemaic Empire and greatly enhanced Cleopatra's status and wealth. Antony's Parthian campaign of 36 BCE, despite some initial successes, ended in a disastrous retreat with heavy losses. He returned to Alexandria, not to Rome, further alienating himself from the Roman political establishment. Egypt became his de facto headquarters. Cleopatra's support had been crucial during the campaign and its aftermath, solidifying her influence over him. He increasingly adopted Eastern customs and titles, presenting himself more as a Hellenistic monarch than a Roman general, a portrayal that Octavian eagerly exploited. In 34 BCE, Antony celebrated a mock Roman triumph in Alexandria to commemorate a minor victory in Armenia. This was a significant departure from Roman tradition, as triumphs were exclusively held in Rome. During this elaborate ceremony, Antony and Cleopatra sat on golden thrones. Antony proclaimed Cleopatra Queen of Kings and Caesarion King of Kings. He declared Caesarion to be Julius Caesar's true son and heir, directly challenging Octavian's legitimacy as Caesar's adopted son. This event, known as the Donations of Alexandria, was even more provocative than the earlier grants. Antony distributed kingdoms and territories among Cleopatra and her children. Alexander Helios was named ruler of Armenia, Parthia, which Antony still hoped to conquer, and Media. Cleopatra Selene was given Cyrenaica and Libya. The young Ptolemy Philadelphus was made ruler of Phoenicia, Syria, and Cilicia. These declarations were largely symbolic for territories not yet under their control, but they signaled Antony's intention to create a vast Eastern empire ruled by his family with Cleopatra. Octavian, back in Rome, seized upon these events with masterful propagandistic skill. He portrayed Antony as a man bewitched by a foreign sorceress, a traitor who had abandoned Roman values and intended to subjugate Rome to an Egyptian queen. He painted Cleopatra as a decadent, power-hungry femme fatale aiming to rule Rome from Alexandria. He emphasized Antony's Oriental behavior, his lavish lifestyle, and his subservience to Cleopatra, stoking Roman xenophobia and fears of monarchical rule. The propaganda war intensified. Octavian illegally obtained Antony's will from the Temple of Vesta and read its contents to the Senate and the public. The will reportedly confirmed Antony's grants of territory to Cleopatra's children, expressed his desire to be buried beside Cleopatra in Alexandria, and further solidified the image of him as thoroughly un-Roman. Whether these were Antony's actual wishes or clever fabrications by Octavian, they had the desired effect, outraging Roman public opinion. Antony, for his part, tried to counter Octavian's propaganda, accusing him of usurping power and forging Caesar's will. But Antony was in Alexandria, far from the center of Roman political life, while Octavian controlled the narrative in Rome. The situation escalated rapidly. In 32 BCE, Antony formally divorced Octavia. This was the final straw. Octavian used it to rally support, stripping Antony of his consular powers and, crucially, declaring war. Significantly, Octavian declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. This was a shrewd political move. It framed the conflict as a foreign war against a dangerous Eastern queen, rather than another Roman civil war, which the Roman populace was weary of. It allowed Romans to fight against Antony without technically being traitors to a fellow Roman. Antony and Cleopatra, now officially enemies of Rome, began to mobilize their forces for the inevitable confrontation. The alliance between Antony and Cleopatra had transformed from a personal and political partnership into a grand imperial vision that directly challenged Rome's dominance. Their ambition, fueled by love and shared power, had set them on a collision course with the calculating and relentless Octavian. The fate of the Roman world and of Egypt hung in the balance as both sides prepared for a final, decisive battle. Cleopatra, Queen of Kings, stood ready to defend her realm and her family's future. The resources of the East were formidable, with a large fleet and numerous legions at Antony and Cleopatra's disposal. Many Roman senators and client kings still supported Antony. However, Octavian held the strategic advantage of Italy and the western provinces, along with the moral high ground in the eyes of many Romans, thanks to his effective propaganda. The stage was set for a climactic showdown that would determine who would rule the Sul, Mediterranean world. The final confrontation between Octavian and the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra culminated in the naval battle of Actium, fought on September 2nd, 31 BCE, off the western coast of Greece. Antony commanded a large fleet supported by Cleopatra's Egyptian squadron. Octavian's fleet, though perhaps smaller, was commanded by the brilliant Admiral Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, and his ships were manned by more experienced crews. The strategic situation leading up to the battle had already put Antony at a disadvantage. Battle itself was hard fought. Antony's larger, heavier quinquiremes faced Agrippa's more maneuverable Liburnian galleys. As the battle raged, with no clear victor emerging, Cleopatra, with her squadron of 60 ships, suddenly broke through the lines and sailed south. The reasons for her departure are still debated by historians. Some argue it was a prearranged signal for a tactical retreat, aiming to break Octavian's blockade and preserve their forces. Others suggest it was an act of panic or betrayal. Whatever the reason, Antony, upon seeing Cleopatra's flagship depart, abandoned his struggling fleet and followed her with a few of his own ships. His desertion demoralized his remaining forces, which fought on bravely, but were ultimately defeated by Agrippa. While many of Antony's land forces remained intact, the naval defeat at Actium was a devastating blow, both militarily and psychologically. It marked the beginning of the end for Antony and Cleopatra, Their dream of an Eastern empire was shattered. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Alexandria, their alliance strained and their hopes dwindling. Antony fell into a deep depression, isolating himself and lamenting his fate. Cleopatra, ever resourceful, began to make contingency plans. She considered fleeing to India or Spain, and even reportedly attempted to have her ships dragged overland from the Nile to the Red Sea to escape the Mediterranean. However, Octavian's forces were closing in, methodically securing the eastern provinces and preparing for an invasion of Egypt. In the summer of 30 BCE, Octavian's legions reached Alexandria. Antony, roused to action, led his remaining troops in a final, desperate defense of the city. He achieved a minor victory, but it was short-lived. Many of his soldiers, seeing the hopelessness of their situation, began to desert to Octavian. As Octavian's forces entered Alexandria, Antony received a false report that Cleopatra had committed suicide. Devastated by this news, and believing all was lost, Antony resolved to die. He asked his loyal servant Eros to kill him, but Eros, unable to strike his master, killed himself instead. Antony then fell on his own sword. The wound was mortal, but he did not die immediately. He was carried, bleeding and in agony, to the mausoleum where Cleopatra had barricaded herself with her closest attendants and her treasure. In a dramatic final scene, Antony was hoisted up the walls of the tomb and died in Cleopatra's arms. His death left Cleopatra alone to face the victorious Octavian. Octavian entered Alexandria as its conqueror. He captured Cleopatra and her children who were in the city. His primary aim was to secure Egypt's wealth and to take Cleopatra back to Rome to be paraded in his triumph, a symbol of his victory over the exotic East. Cleopatra, proud and determined, to avoid such public humiliation, engaged in negotiations with Octavian. She reportedly tried to charm him, as she had Caesar and Antony, but Octavian, cold and calculating, remained unmoved by her pleas, though he treated her with a degree of respect, realizing that Octavian would not grant her any meaningful concessions, and that her fate was sealed. Cleopatra resolved to take her own life. On August 12, 30 BCE, at the age of 39, Cleopatra died. The traditional account, popularized by Plutarch, tells of her smuggling an asp, a venomous Egyptian cobra, into her chambers concealed in a basket of figs. She allowed the serpent to bite her, choosing a death that was both regal and, in Egyptian belief, deifying. Other accounts suggest she may have used a poisoned ointment or pin. Octavian, though reportedly frustrated at being denied his ultimate prize for his triumph, allowed Cleopatra to be buried with full royal honors beside Mark Antony in her mausoleum. Her death marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. It also signified the end of Egypt's independence. Egypt became a Roman province, its vast wealth now flowing directly into Octavian's coffers, helping him consolidate his power and eventually become Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The fate of Cleopatra's children was varied. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, represented a potential threat to Octavian's claim as Caesar's soul heir. Octavian, famously quoted as saying, "2 Caesars are 1 too many," had Caesarion executed. Antony's children with Cleopatra, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, were taken to Rome and paraded in Octavian's triumph. They were then raised by Antony's Roman wife, Octavia, a testament to her magnanimity. Cleopatra Selene later married King Juba, the second of Mauritania, and their descendants continued for several generations. Cleopatra's legacy has endured for over 2 millennia. She has been depicted as a scheming seductress, a romantic heroine, and a brilliant political strategist. She was undoubtedly a woman of exceptional intellect, charisma, and ambition, who navigated the treacherous politics of her time with remarkable skill. She used her allure and her intelligence to forge alliances with 2 of the most powerful men of her era, always with the aim of preserving Egypt's independence and her own rule. Though ultimately defeated, Cleopatra remains one of history's most fascinating and iconic figures, the last pharaoh of Egypt and a queen who dared to challenge the might of Rome.